Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to crank up the heat a bit. We're diving into the world of metalworking.
Yeah.
But we're not just talking about any job. We're going deep into the role of a metal annealer.
Yeah, you got it. It's a profession that I think often flies under the radar, but
Yeah.
let me tell you, there's a lot more to it than just melting metal.
Okay, so you've piqued my interest. We've got some great insights from RoleCatcher.com. They have a whole section of their site dedicated to career guides, and lucky for us, they've got one specifically for metal annealers. And for anyone who doesn't know, RoleCatcher.com is a career platform, and they have a knack for uncovering kind of the unexpected side of different jobs.
Yeah, their career guides are great because they don't just tell you what a job is. They break it down so you can actually see yourself doing it.
Absolutely. That's what we try to do here. So when we say a metal annealer, what are we actually talking about? What does a typical day look like for one of these metal wizards?
Metal wizards. I like that. It does
Yeah.
have like a certain mystique to it, right?
Right.
So, imagine these giant ovens called kilns, and they're glowing with intense heat, and the metal annealer is the one like orchestrating it all.
Okay.
They're using these kilns to heat metal, but specifically to soften it up
Right.
so it can be shaped and molded without breaking.
Okay. That's pretty cool, but it also sounds like a job where you could, get burned, literally.
Yeah.
What separates just a, casual metal heater from a true metal annealer?
Precision, precision, precision.
Mm-hmm.
And RoleCatcher really, really stresses that. This isn't just about cranking up the heat.
Right.
Think of it like baking a cake.
Okay.
You wouldn't just throw it in the oven at any temperature and hope for
Right.
the best, right?
Right.
So each metal has its own kind of like recipe
Okay.
with specific temperatures and cooling times that need to be followed meticulously
Oh, wow.
to get it just right.
So it's a high-stakes science experiment
Yeah.
with molten metal. What happens if they miss a step in the recipe?
Well, that's where the real expertise comes in. A skilled metal annealer, they know that even a slight miscalculation can compromise the entire batch of metal.
Wow.
So we're talking about potential weaknesses, cracks, even something called orange peel.
Orange peel.
Yeah, it's a surface defect that can make the metal prone to breaking.
And we're talking about, metal that could end up in bridges, airplanes, even like medical devices.
Yeah, absolutely. And the integrity of the metal is like paramount. So a metal annealer's job, it's not just about making the metal like, pliable and workable. It's about making sure that it's flawless.
So there's a lot riding on their shoulders. This is making me think that, becoming a metal annealer is probably no walk in the park. What does RoleCatcher say about, like, the skills and qualifications needed?
You might be surprised to hear this. It's not necessarily a field that requires a fancy college degree.
Really? I would have thought that some intense metallurgy knowledge would be, like, prerequisite.
Oh, it's definitely important.
Yeah. Okay.
But RoleCatcher really highlights that hands-on experience is often the most valuable thing you can have.
Okay.
So think apprenticeships, internships, even entry-level positions in, metalworking shops. It's about building up that like practical know-how, understanding how different metals behave, in the real world, not just in a textbook.
That makes sense. It's one thing to read about annealing temperatures. It's another to, actually see the metal transform in the kiln.
Exactly. And speaking of like seeing things transform, RoleCatcher actually maps out a pretty like cool career trajectory
Okay.
for metal annealers. They
Right.
break it down into 4 stages: entry level, junior, experienced, senior.
Okay, so walk us through those. What does, like, growth look like in this field?
So at the entry level, you're really focused on mastering the basics. You're learning how to operate those kilns, how to monitor that annealing process, and how to like spot those telltale flaws.
Right.
As you get more experience, you move into a junior role.
Yeah.
You get more responsibility. You're fine-tuning your understanding of how different metals, react to the heat. You're making those like finer adjustments to achieve very, very specific properties.
It's like leveling up in a video game.
Yeah,
You're gaining experience points, you're unlocking new skills.
I like that analogy. And as you reach that experience stage, that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
You might be leading a team of metal annealers. You might be the one who's like troubleshooting like technical problems. You might even collaborate with engineers to optimize that whole metal shaping process.
Wow. So you could go from working with your hands in like, kind of a hot workshop to spearheading innovation in the field. That's quite a jump.
It is. And then finally, as a senior metal annealer, that's where you're the go-to expert.
Wow.
You're overseeing entire operations, setting quality standards, maybe even like leading research into new annealing techniques.
So you're not just learning a single skill set, you're signing up for like a lifetime of learning and evolution. That constant evolution of the field makes me wonder, what are some ways metal annealers can like stay ahead of the curve? RoleCatcher mentioned some new technologies popping up.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like every industry these days, metal annealing is being touched by technology. We're talking about new types of kilns, more sophisticated temperature controls, even like digital imaging that can help spot like microscopic flaws in the metal.
It's amazing to think how something as like, ancient as working with metal is being shaped by cutting edge technology. What does that mean for someone considering this as a career?
It means adaptability and a thirst for knowledge are key.
Mm-hmm.
RoleCatcher specifically highlights industry associations, like the National Institute for Metalworking Skills. They offer certifications, workshops, networking opportunities that can be super valuable for staying up to date.
So it's not enough to just be good at the hands-on work. You need to be like plugged into the latest, advancements and stuff too.
Exactly. Think of it like this. If you want to be a master chef, you don't just learn like a few basic recipes and call it a day.
Right.
You're constantly experimenting with new ingredients, new techniques, and you're staying informed about, culinary trends. It's the same idea with metal annealing.
So it's about combining kind of that, traditional craftsmanship with a forward-thinking mindset too. That's fascinating. We've talked about the heat, the precision, the technology, but what about the human element? What are some personality traits that might, like, make someone a good fit for this kind of work?
That's a great question. RoleCatcher doesn't really dive too deep into personality types,
Okay.
but I think based on what we've discussed, I think a few things come to mind. Obviously, you need someone who enjoys working with their hands.
Yeah.
Someone who finds satisfaction in that process of taking like raw materials and turning them into something, tangible.
A bit of a maker at heart.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's not just about the physical work, though. A good metal annealer is also a problem solver. Someone who enjoys the challenge of figuring out the why behind a process, not just the how.
Right.
Remember, each metal behaves differently, and finding that perfect annealing recipe requires a bit of detective work.
It's like being a metal whisperer.
Uh-huh.
You're learning to read those subtle cues and understand the language of the metal.
I like that. It does feel a bit like that sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially when you're working with, like a tricky alloy and you finally coax it into doing what you want.
Yeah. I bet there's a lot of satisfaction in those like aha moments. Speaking of which, we've covered a ton of ground here. If you had to like distill it down, what's the one big takeaway you want our listener to walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that the world of metal annealing, it's full of these like hidden depths. It's a field where artistry meets science. It's where tradition and technology kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And most importantly, it's a field that's like ripe with opportunity.
Yeah.
For those who are willing to put in the heat, embrace the challenge.
I love it. And for our listener who is hopefully now picturing themselves in that hot workshop surrounded by, the glowing metal, I'm going to leave you with this thought. If you were a metal annealer, what kind of object or project would you be most excited to work on? What metal masterpiece would you create? And that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.